Imprisoned for a decade, a majestic Mustang's spirit was nearly broken by heavy chains and isolation. But what happened in the moments after his freedom would leave witnesses in tears. This is a story of resilience that almost never came to light. In the shadows of a remote property, a once wild Mustang spent 10 brutal years restricted by chains, his freedom stripped away, his spirit dimming with each passing season. Today, we'll take you through the heart-wrenching journey of this magnificent creature, from his decade of confinement to an incredible transformation that nobody saw coming. You'll witness the moment these chains finally fell away, and the extraordinary events that followed. What this horse did next challenged everything we thought we knew about an animal's capacity to forgive and heal. The harsh Nevada sun beat down on the dusty ranch as Sarah Martinez, a local veterinarian, received an anonymous tip about a horse in desperate need of help. She'd seen many cases of neglect throughout her 15-year career, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to discover. The directions led her down a winding dirt road, far from the nearest town, where even cell phone signals feared to venture. As her truck rounded the final bend, the first thing that caught her eye was the glint of metal. Not the usual ranch equipment or farm tools, but the dull shine of heavy chains. The sound that followed would haunt her for years to come, the rhythmic clanking of metal against metal, a sound that had become the heartbeat of one horse's imprisonment. There he stood, a shadow of what a Mustang should be. His coat, which should have gleamed with the rich colors of his wild heritage, was matted and dull. The proud, muscular frame that once carried him across vast desert plains had withered under the weight of confinement. But it was his eyes that struck Sarah the deepest. Eyes that still held embers of the wild spirit that had survived a decade. Of chains, the property appeared abandoned, with weeds growing through cracks in the concrete and windows boarded up with weathered plywood. Yet someone had been maintaining the bare minimum to keep the horse alive. A water trough, filled, but green with algae and scattered piles of hay that had seen better days. The chains that bound him were extensive, not just a simple tether, but an elaborate system of restraints that allowed barely enough movement to reach food and water. Sarah's trained eye quickly assessed the situation. The chains had left. Deep grooves in the horse's flesh, particularly around his neck and legs. His hooves, never properly cared for, had grown and split in ways that would require months of careful attention to correct. But perhaps most concerning was the way he stood, completely still, as if he had learned that movement only brought pain. Pulling out her phone, Sarah discovered what she had feared. No signal. She would need to drive back to the main road to call for help, but something made her hesitate. The horse was watching her intently now, and in those eyes she saw something. She couldn't explain. Recognition, perhaps, of a chance for change. As she approached slowly, speaking in soft, soothing tones, the Mustang's ears pricked forward, the first sign that somewhere inside this broken creature, hope still flickered. It was a small gesture, but to Sarah, it was everything. This wasn't just going to be another rescue. This was going to be a story of redemption that would challenge everything she thought she knew about healing, trust, and the unbreakable spirit of these magnificent animals. What Sarah didn't know then, as she stood in that desolate yard with the chained Mustang, was that this moment would spark a chain of events that would not only transform the horse's life, but would also ignite a movement that would reach far beyond the borders of their small Nevada community. The story of this chained Mustang was about to become a testament to the power of freedom, second chances, and the extraordinary capacity for forgiveness that exists in these remarkable creatures. The drive back to the main road felt like the longest 5 minutes of Sarah's life. Every bump in the dirt track reminded her of the desperate situation she'd left behind. As soon as her phone showed its first bar of signal, she pulled over and made 2 crucial calls. one to the local sheriff's department and another to Desert Heart's Horse Sanctuary, where she volunteered on weekends. "We've got a situation," she explained to Mark Reynolds, the sanctuary's founder. "I've never seen anything like it. We're going to need cutting equipment, a trailer, and probably a whole team." Her voice cracked slightly as she described the elaborate chain system that held the Mustang captive. "And Mark, bring Doctor." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thompson. We're going to need his expertise with severe trauma cases. Within an hour, a convoy of vehicles kicked up dust along the remote road. 2 police cruisers led the way, followed by the sanctuary's horse trailer and a truck loaded with rescue equipment. Sarah had spent the waiting time trying to piece together the horse's story from the property's clues. The mail in the rusted box was addressed to a James Wilson, but the newest piece was dated 3 years ago. The sheriff's department had run a quick check. The property had been in foreclosure for 2 years, but the process had stalled in the courts. The owner had seemingly vanished, leaving behind nothing but a chained Mustang as a testament to human cruelty. How the horse had survived, especially in recent years, remained a mystery that would slowly unravel in the days to come. As the rescue team pulled up, the Mustang's reaction surprised everyone. Instead of showing fear at the sudden arrival of so many people, he stood eerily still, watching. Dr. Thompson, a veterinarian with 30 years of experience working with traumatized horses, approached slowly, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. "This is going to be delicate," he muttered, noting how the chains had become almost embedded in places. "The physical removal will be the easy part. It's the psychological chains we'll really need to worry about." He began documenting everything with his camera, evidence for potential legal proceedings, but also a record of where their healing journey would begin. The sheriff's deputies secured the scene while the rescue team assembled their equipment. The sound of the power tools being prepared caused the first real reaction they'd seen from the Mustang. A subtle trembling that spoke volumes about his past experiences with human tools and machines. Sarah positioned herself near his head, speaking in soft, constant tones. "You're going to be okay, boy. This is your last day in chains. I promise you that." Whether it was her voice, her presence, or some deep understanding of the changing tide in his life, the Mustang remained surprisingly calm as Dr. Thompson began the painstaking process of documenting each chain's position before removal. The complexity of the restraint system became fully apparent as they worked. Whoever had imprisoned this magnificent creature had done so with deliberate, calculated precision. The chains weren't just restrictive, they were designed to break his spirit systematically. Different lengths and weights controlled his head movement, his ability to lie down, even how far he could step in any direction. As Mark from the sanctuary examined the setup, his face grew darker. "This wasn't just neglect," he said quietly. To Sarah, someone knew exactly what they were doing. This was about control, total, complete control over a wild spirit. The revelation added another layer of horror to an already devastating scene. The actual removal of the chains would take hours. Each link had to be carefully cut away, with frequent breaks to let the Mustang adjust to the gradual return of freedom of movement. During these pauses, Dr. Thompson would gently clean and examine the revealed wounds, building a medical record that would later prove crucial in more ways than anyone could anticipate. What became increasingly clear as the afternoon wore on was that this rescue was just the beginning. The physical chains might be falling away, but the real challenge lay ahead, helping this proud creature remember who he was before the chains, and showing him that there was still a place in the world for his wild heart to run free. The sun, was setting by the time the last chain fell away. In the fading light, the rescue team stood back, collectively holding their breath as they witnessed something extraordinary. For the first time in a decade, the Mustang was completely free of his metal restraints. The moment seemed to hang, suspended in time, heavy with anticipation and unspoken questions. At first, he didn't move at all. It was as if his body hadn't yet received the message that the chains were gone. Dr. Thompson explained in hushed tones to the team that this was common in long-term captivity cases. The mind and body become so accustomed to restrictions that freedom itself becomes foreign, almost frightening. Sarah remained closest to him, her presence a constant through the hours of work. She noticed something subtle that others might have missed. His nostrils flaring slightly, testing the air as if sensing the change in his circumstances. Then came the first tentative step forward, a movement so small it was barely perceptible, but one that brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. The medical assessment that followed revealed the full extent of his condition. Beyond the obvious wounds from the chains, deep grooves in his flesh that had calloused over years, there were numerous other health issues to address. His hooves, never properly cared for, had developed severe problems. Malnutrition had left his coat dull and his body weakened. But most concerning to Dr. Thompson were the psychological implications of such prolonged confinement. In the wild, Mustangs roam territories spanning hundreds of miles, he explained, while documenting the horse's condition. To confine one to a space barely larger than his body length, it goes against everything in their nature. He paused, examining a particularly deep scar. The fact that he survived at all speaks to an extraordinary will to live. The decision to transport him to Desert Heart Sanctuary had to be handled with extreme care. After years of immobility, the simple act of walking to the trailer could prove dangerous. His muscles had atrophied, and no one knew how he would react to being asked to move any significant distance. Mark brought out special protective boots they'd brought for the Mustang's damaged hooves. Getting them on proved to be the first real challenge of his new freedom. Each touch to his legs initially triggered a trembling response. Not aggressive, but deeply fearful. Sarah continued her gentle monologue, explaining every move before it happened. "It's okay, boy. These will help you walk without pain. Just a gentle touch, see? Nothing like the chains. Nothing will ever be like those chains again." Her voice seemed to have a calming effect, and slowly, carefully, they managed to protect his feet for the journey ahead. The loading process took over an hour. The team had brought a trailer specially equipped for rescued horses, with extra padding and support systems, but the Mustang had to make the choice to enter on his own. They created a gentle pathway using guide ropes, more to provide a sense of security than actual restraint. What happened next would become one of the most talked-about moments among the rescue team for years to come. As they stood there, collectively willing him to take those crucial steps toward the trailer, the Mustang turned his head and looked directly at Sarah. In that moment, she would later swear she saw a flicker of his original wild spirit, not broken as they had feared, but preserved somewhere deep inside, waiting for this chance. With painstaking slowness, he began to move forward. Each step seemed to require immense concentration, his legs remembering movements they hadn't made in years. The team watched in respectful silence as he made his way to the trailer, stopping frequently to rest but never refusing to continue. Just before he entered the trailer, something remarkable happened. He lifted his head higher than they'd seen all day, and for a brief moment his stance transformed, echoing the proud bearing of his wild ancestors. Dr. Thompson quickly documented this moment, recognizing its significance. "That," he whispered to Sarah, "is why we never give up on these cases. No matter how long they've been chained, somewhere inside, they remember who they really are." The drive to the sanctuary would take several hours, and Sarah insisted on riding in the trailer with him. As they pulled away from the property that had been his prison for so long, she noticed something that gave her hope. The Mustang was trembling, but not from fear. For the first time, he was feeling the gentle movement of travel, the promise of somewhere new. His journey from chains to freedom had begun, but no one could have predicted the extraordinary path that lay ahead. Desert Heart Sanctuary was illuminated by floodlights when the trailer arrived just after midnight. The team had radioed ahead, and the facility's night staff had prepared a special rehabilitation stall, larger than standard, with extra bedding and specialized padding along the walls. Every detail had been considered to help their new resident transition from his decades-long confinement to a space that offered both security and the first tastes of freedom. The sanctuary's head of rehabilitation, Dr. Maria Gonzalez, waited with her team as the trailer backed up to the unloading area. She dealt with numerous rescue cases over her 20-year career, but something about this one felt different. Perhaps it was the unusual nature of his captivity, or maybe it was the way Sarah had described his resilient spirit during their phone consultation on the drive over. The Mustang's first steps onto sanctuary ground were tentative. The change in flooring, from trailer to concrete, then to the specially prepared rubber matting, caused him to pause with each transition. His hooves, despite the protective boots, were clearly causing him discomfort, yet there was something different about his demeanor now, a subtle shift that both Sarah and Dr. Thompson had noticed during the journey. "He's processing everything," Dr. Gonzalez observed, watching his ears pivot to track every sound. "Look at how he's mapping his environment. That's not typical behavior for a traumatized horse. There's still active intelligence there, still curiosity." This observation would prove crucial in planning his rehabilitation program. The initial examination in the treatment area revealed the full scope of what they were dealing with. Under proper lighting, Dr. Gonzalez documented extensive muscle atrophy, particularly in his hindquarters and neck, the result of years of restricted movement. The chain marks told their own story. Some wounds were old and scarred, while others were raw and would require immediate attention. But it was his blood work that presented the most pressing concern. "His vitamin D levels are dangerously low," Dr. Gonzalez explained to the team. "The lack of sunlight and proper nutrition has affected his entire system. We're looking at potential bone density issues, immune system complications. It's going to take months just to get his basic health markers back to normal ranges." What amazed the medical team most was his tolerance for examination. Despite years of presumed negative human contact, he remained calm as they drew blood, treated wounds, and documented his condition. Sarah stayed by his head throughout the process, continuing the gentle conversation she'd maintained since finding him. The early hours of that first morning brought an unexpected challenge. As dawn approached, they needed to move him to his rehabilitation stall, but the Mustang suddenly became agitated. It took them several minutes to understand why. The sky was lightening, and for the first time in years, he was about to see a sunrise. The team made a quick decision to let him experience this moment from the outdoor treatment area. What followed brought tears to even the most seasoned staff members' eyes. As the first rays of sun crept over the horizon, the Mustang lifted his head, his nostrils flaring wide. For a brief moment, he almost seemed to glow in the early morning light, his dull coat taking on hints of the rich colors it once held. A soft, nickering sound, his first vocalization since the rescue, echoed across the quiet sanctuary. "That right there," Dr. Thompson said quietly, "is why we do this work. 10 years in chains couldn't kill his spirit. Look at him. He still remembers who he is." The moment served as a powerful reminder to everyone present that beneath the physical damage and trauma, the heart of a wild Mustang still beat strong. The rest of that first morning was spent settling him into his rehabilitation stall. The space had been carefully designed to provide security while gradually reintroducing the concept of choice. Multiple water sources, different types of hay placed at varying heights, and most importantly, clear sightlines to the outside world through safety-screened windows. As the team finally prepared to end their long night shift, Dr. Gonzalez made one final note in his medical record. Under initial prognosis, she wrote, subject displays remarkable resilience and cognitive awareness despite severe physical trauma. Recommend immediate implementation of comprehensive rehabilitation program with emphasis on psychological healing alongside physical recovery. Initial observations suggest potential for full rehabilitation exceeding standard expectations for long-term trauma cases. The first week of rehabilitation revealed surprising aspects of the Mustang's character that no one had anticipated. While most horses who've endured severe trauma tend to withdraw or show aggressive defensive behaviors, he displayed an almost methodical approach to exploring his new environment. Dr. Gonzalez began calling him the Professor because of his careful, analytical way of investigating everything in his stall. Each morning brought new revelations. The sanctuary staff noticed how he would systematically test different types of hay, not just eating what was closest, but making deliberate choices. He showed a particular preference for the Timothy hay placed in the upper feeding station, something that excited the rehabilitation team because reaching up would help strengthen his atrophied neck muscles. Sarah, who had taken temporary leave from her regular veterinary practice to assist with his care, observed something even more intriguing. He's not just responding to his environment, she explained during a team meeting on day 5. He's actively learning. Watch how he's figured out that the morning sun hits that corner of his stall first. Now he positions himself there every dawn, soaking in the warmth. The sanctuary's resident equine behaviorist, Dr. James Chen, spent hours documenting these subtle signs of intelligence and adaptation. What we're seeing here is remarkable, he noted in his observation log. Despite a decade of having every choice stripped away, his decision-making capabilities appear intact. He's not just surviving in his new environment, he's actively engaging with it. Physical therapy began gradually with passive range of motion exercises designed to help rebuild his muscle strength without overwhelming his system. The team was prepared for resistance or fear responses, common in horses who've experienced long-term restraint. Instead, they encountered what Dr. Thompson described as mindful cooperation. During these sessions, the Mustang would stand perfectly, still, shifting his weight only when necessary to facilitate the therapeutic movements. More remarkably, he began to anticipate the sequence of exercises, moving his legs into position before the therapist initiated contact. This level of cognitive engagement was unprecedented in a trauma case of this severity. The sanctuary's farrier, Mike Henderson, faced perhaps the most challenging aspect of the rehabilitation, addressing the severe hoof problems that had developed during captivity. Usually, with neglect cases this severe, we have to sedate the horse for any hoof work, Mike explained. But this guy, it's like he understands we're trying to help him. Each hoof trimming session became a lesson in trust. The Mustang would lift each foot when prompted, holding it steady despite what must have been considerable discomfort. Mike worked in short sessions, always stopping before the horse showed signs of stress. He's teaching us as much about patience as we're teaching him about trust, Mike observed. By the end of the first week, the team had established a comprehensive care routine, but it was the Mustang who often seemed to set the pace. He developed a particular connection with Lisa, a young volunteer who spent her lunch breaks reading books aloud near his stall. No one could explain why, but his stress indicators noticeably decreased during these impromptu reading sessions. Dr. Gonzalez made an interesting notation in his medical record. Subject displays unprecedented levels of social intelligence and adaptive behavior. Traditional rehabilitation metrics may need to be adjusted to accommodate his unique cognitive capabilities. Recommend implementation of enrichment activities typically reserved for later stages of recovery. The most significant breakthrough came on day 8 during a morning therapy session. Sarah had been gently massaging his neck, working out the tension from years of bearing the weight of chains, when she felt a subtle change beneath her hands. The Mustang had completely relaxed his neck muscles for the first time since his rescue. It was a small moment, but one that brought tears to her eyes. "That's it," she whispered to him. "You're remembering how it feels to just be a horse again." The Mustang responded by doing something he hadn't done since arriving at the sanctuary. He lowered his head and released a long, soft breath, what horse people often call the sigh of relief. This moment marked a turning point in his rehabilitation. It wasn't just about physical recovery anymore. They were witnessing the reawakening of a spirit that had endured unimaginable hardship without losing its capacity for trust and healing. The sanctuary team began to realize that this wasn't just another rescue case. They were participating in something extraordinary, a testament to the resilience of life itself. The decision to introduce the Mustang to other horses came earlier than planned, prompted by an unexpected development. 2 weeks into his rehabilitation, the sanctuary received another rescue, a severely traumatized mare who refused all human contact. Despite the staff's best efforts, she remained in a state of constant anxiety, barely eating and showing signs of dangerous stress levels. The mare's stall was positioned across from the Mustang's, and what happened next astonished even the most experienced staff members. Every time the mare showed signs of distress, the Mustang would position himself at his stall door, maintaining a steady, calm presence. His quiet strength seemed to have a profound effect on her. Dr. Chen spent several nights observing this interaction through the sanctuary's monitoring system. "What we're seeing here is extraordinary," he reported to the team. "He's essentially teaching her how to feel safe again. Watch how he models calm behavior when the night staff makes their rounds. It's almost like he's showing her, see, these humans are different. We can trust them." The mare's transformation was remarkable. Within days, she began mimicking the Mustang's behavior, approaching her water when he did, showing interest in hay when he ate, and gradually displaying less anxiety during human interactions. This unexpected development led Dr. Gonzalez to revise their rehabilitation timeline. "He's not just recovering," she explained during an emergency team meeting. "He's becoming a healer in his own right. We need to explore this capacity." The team developed a new approach, one that would carefully integrate the Mustang's natural ability to calm other traumatized horses into their rehabilitation program. The first physical introduction was carefully orchestrated. They chose a small, secure paddock adjacent to the rehabilitation area. The mare would be allowed to share the space with the Mustang under close supervision. Everyone held their breath as the two horses were brought together. What followed was a masterclass in equine communication. The Mustang, still weak from his ordeal, maintained a perfectly still, non-threatening posture as the mare circled nervously around him. When she finally approached, he didn't move. He simply lowered his head slightly, a gesture of peaceful intention that spoke volumes about his emotional intelligence. Sarah, who had remained a constant presence throughout his rehabilitation, found herself fighting back tears. "Look at him," she whispered to Doctor. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thompson, 10 years in chains, and he still remembers exactly how to speak horse. He still knows exactly what she needs." The success of this first introduction led to a carefully expanded program. Other traumatized horses at the sanctuary began spending supervised time with the Mustang. Staff nicknamed these sessions Professor's Office Hours, as one by one, troubled horses seemed to find peace in his presence. But it wasn't just the horses who were learning. The sanctuary team began documenting what they called the Mustang method, the unique way he approached new situations and interactions. His patience, his methodical assessment of changes in his environment, and his extraordinary capacity for forgiveness became teaching tools for the sanctuary's rehabilitation program. Dr. Chen's research notes from this period would later become the foundation for a groundbreaking paper on trauma recovery in horses. What makes this case unique, he wrote, is not just the subject's remarkable recovery, but his apparent conscious choice to become an agent of healing for others. This challenges our understanding of equine emotional processing and social structures. The Mustang's influence extended beyond the immediate rehabilitation area. Regular sanctuary visitors began noticing the change in atmosphere. The usual tension that often surrounded rescue facilities was replaced by a sense of calm that seemed to emanate from his corner of the sanctuary. One particularly moving moment came when a group of at-risk youth visited the sanctuary as part of their therapy program. These teens, many of whom had experienced trauma themselves, were drawn to the Mustang's quiet strength. When they learned his story, how he had survived a decade in chains only to become a source of healing for others, many found parallels with their own struggles. Lisa, the volunteer who had spent so many lunch breaks reading to him, observed something profound during these visits. "He looks at these kids the same way he looks at the traumatized horses," she noted in her volunteer log. "It's like he recognizes something in them, a shared experience of pain, but also a shared capacity for healing." The sanctuary's transformation continued, rippling outward from the once chained Mustang, who had somehow maintained not just his will to live, but his ability to connect, to trust, and to heal. His story was becoming more than just a tale of survival. It was evolving into a testament to the extraordinary capacity for resilience and compassion that can emerge from even the darkest circumstances. Word of the remarkable Mustang began to spread beyond the sanctuary's boundaries, starting as whispers among local horse enthusiasts and gradually catching the attention of regional media. It began with a small article in the local newspaper featuring a photograph of the Mustang standing quietly beside the traumatized mare, their mutual healing evident in their relaxed postures and peaceful expressions. The story might have remained local if not for Sandra Martinez, a documentary filmmaker who specialized in wildlife rehabilitation stories. She had been visiting her sister, Sarah, the veterinarian who had first discovered the chained Mustang, when she witnessed one of his healing sessions with another traumatized horse. "There's something here that needs to be shared with the world," Sandra insisted, her filmmaker's instinct recognizing the powerful narrative unfolding at the sanctuary. After careful consideration and extensive discussions about how to minimize any impact on the rehabilitation program, the sanctuary agreed to let her document the Mustang's journey. Sandra's approach was gentle and unobtrusive. She set up remote cameras around his paddock and the rehabilitation area, capturing natural interactions without human interference. The footage she collected was extraordinary, showing not just the physical transformation of the once chained horse, but the subtle ways he communicated with other troubled animals. One particularly powerful sequence captured the moment a newly rescued horse arrived at the sanctuary. The new arrival, a former racing thoroughbred, was in a state of severe anxiety, showing signs of post-traumatic stress from his racing career. The footage showed the Mustang's immediate response, how he positioned himself, how he used subtle body language to communicate safety and calm. "What we're witnessing, Doctor," Chen explained in his interview for the documentary, "is emotional intelligence that challenges our understanding of trauma recovery. This Mustang isn't just surviving his own trauma, he's actively helping others navigate theirs. It's as if his decade in chains gave him a unique insight into suffering and the path to healing. The documentary caught the attention of major animal welfare organizations. Representatives began visiting the sanctuary, studying what they now called the Mustang method of rehabilitation. The implications for trauma recovery in animals were significant, suggesting new approaches to healing that emphasized peer support among rescued animals. As media attention grew, so did the challenge of protecting the Mustang's peaceful environment. The sanctuary implemented strict protocols to ensure that public interest didn't interfere with the rehabilitation work. They began offering scheduled viewing times, during which visitors could quietly observe the Mustang and his companions from a distance that wouldn't disturb their routine. The story resonated particularly strongly with veterans groups working with equine therapy programs. Many veterans who visited the sanctuary spoke of feeling a deep connection with the Mustang's story of survival and transformation. One veteran, a former Marine named James, spent hours simply sitting near the paddock, finding peace in the presence of an animal who had endured his own form of captivity. "He doesn't just survive," James observed during an interview for the documentary. "He thrives, and he helps others thrive. That's what real strength looks like." This perspective began shaping how the sanctuary approached their rehabilitation programs, leading to partnerships with veterans organizations and trauma recovery centers. Local schools began requesting educational visits, seeing in the Mustang's story valuable lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of compassion. The sanctuary developed a careful program that allowed small groups of students to learn from his example while respecting his space and routine. Dr. Gonzalez found herself frequently explaining to visitors why the Mustang's case was so extraordinary. "It's not just that he survived a decade in chains," she would tell them. "It's that he emerged from that experience with his capacity for connection not just intact, but enhanced. He shows us that trauma doesn't have to define a life. It can become a source of wisdom and healing for others." The impact of his story began reaching beyond individual visitors to influence policy discussions about animal welfare. Advocacy groups used his case to illustrate the need for stronger protections for horses and other animals. The detailed documentation of his rehabilitation provided powerful evidence for the sophisticated emotional lives of horses and their remarkable capacity for recovery. As his story spread, letters and messages began arriving at the sanctuary from around the country. Many came from people facing their own struggles with trauma and adversity, finding hope and inspiration in the story of a horse who had transformed a decade of suffering into a source of healing for others. As the Mustang story gained national attention, law enforcement agencies began piecing together the dark history behind his decade of imprisonment. Detective Rachel Torres, a veteran of the county's Animal Crimes Unit, took personal interest in the case, determined to uncover how such prolonged abuse could have gone unnoticed for so long. The investigation started with the property records. James Wilson, the last known owner, had disappeared 3 years ago, but his paper trail told a disturbing story. Records showed he had purchased the Mustang from a wild horse auction in Nevada, promising to provide him with a good home. What happened next revealed alarming gaps in the system designed to protect these wild animals. The initial purchase was completely legal, Detective Torres explained during a briefing with animal welfare officials. But after that, the horse essentially disappeared from all official records. No veterinary visits, no documentation, nothing. It's as if he ceased to exist on paper the moment he left that auction. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former neighbor who had moved away years ago came forward after seeing the documentary footage. Her testimony opened up new avenues of investigation. She described hearing the constant clanking, of chains at night, but had been told by Wilson that he was operating a legitimate horse training facility. "I knew something wasn't right," she admitted during her interview with investigators. "But when I called to report it, I was told that without clear evidence of abuse, they couldn't investigate private property. I've carried that guilt for years." Her testimony highlighted a critical flaw in existing animal welfare laws: the difficulty of investigating suspected abuse on private property without concrete evidence. The investigation uncovered more disturbing details. Wilson had apparently been part of a network of unlicensed horse traders who exploited loopholes in wild horse adoption programs. The Mustang's case wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger pattern of abuse, hidden behind the facade of legitimate horse training operations. Dr. Thompson's detailed documentation of the Mustang's injuries became crucial evidence. The sophisticated chain system used to restrain him wasn't improvised. It was deliberately designed to maximize control while minimizing visible signs of abuse from outside the property. This discovery suggested premeditation and expertise that pointed to a larger criminal enterprise. Local prosecutors faced a challenge. While the abuse was clear, the statute of limitations on animal cruelty charges had expired for much of the period in question. However, the case sparked intense public interest in reforming these limitations. Legal experts began arguing that cases of prolonged abuse should be treated as continuing crimes, not subject to standard time limitations. State Senator Maria Rodriguez, moved by the Mustang's story, began drafting new legislation. The Mustang Bill, as it came to be known, proposed significant changes to animal welfare laws. It called for stricter monitoring of adopted wild horses, regular welfare checks, and expanded authority for investigators to access private property when abuse was suspected. The sanctuary became a focal point for these legislative efforts. Dr. Gonzalez and her team testified before state committees, using the Mustang's case to illustrate the need for systemic change. Their evidence was compelling. Detailed medical records, photographs, and documentation of his remarkable recovery demonstrated both the severity of his abuse and the potential for healing when proper care was provided. While Wilson himself was never found, the investigation led to the discovery and rescue of other horses in similar situations. The criminal network began to unravel as more former associates came forward, either out of guilt or fear of prosecution. Each new rescue seemed to validate the Mustang's role as a catalyst for change. The legal proceedings attracted attention from animal rights attorneys nationwide. They saw in this case an opportunity to establish new precedents for animal welfare law. The combination of detailed documentation, public outrage, and the Mustang's powerful story of survival created perfect conditions for legislative reform. Sarah, who had first discovered him, found herself increasingly involved in advocacy work. Her testimony about that first encounter, finding him imprisoned in chains, became a powerful tool for educating lawmakers about the reality of animal abuse. "His story isn't just about one horse," she would tell them. "It's about all the animals we don't find in time, and our responsibility to change the systems that failed them." As the investigation continued to unfold, it became clear that the Mustang's legacy would extend far beyond his own remarkable journey of healing. His case was becoming a watershed moment in animal welfare law, forcing society to confront uncomfortable questions about responsibility, oversight, and justice for creatures who cannot speak for themselves. 6 months into the Mustang's rehabilitation, Desert Heart Sanctuary had transformed into an unexpected hub of scientific research. Dr. Elena Martinez, a leading expert in equine behavioral psychology from UC Davis, arrived with a team of researchers to document what they were calling the empathy phenomenon, the Mustang's extraordinary ability to connect with and heal other traumatized horses. The research team set up sophisticated monitoring equipment around his paddock, including high-speed cameras capable of capturing the subtlest changes in body language and infrared sensors to track stress responses in both the Mustang and the horses he interacted with. What they discovered would challenge existing theories about equine emotional intelligence. "We're observing behaviors that defy conventional understanding," Dr. Martinez explained during a preliminary review of their findings. "This horse isn't just responding to other animals' distress. He's actively implementing what appears to be a deliberate therapeutic approach." The data showed that the Mustang would adjust his body position, breathing rate, and even his vocal communications based on the specific trauma responses of each horse he encountered. One case study particularly fascinated the research team. A newly rescued thoroughbred, previously used in illegal racing, arrived at the sanctuary with severe anxiety and aggressive tendencies. Traditional rehabilitation methods had failed at 3 other facilities. The team documented the Mustang's first interaction with this troubled horse. "What we witnessed was remarkable," noted Dr. James Wong, a specialist in trauma recovery. "The Mustang immediately recognized signs of post-traumatic stress that even our trained staff hadn't noticed. He positioned himself at precisely the right distance, close enough to provide comfort, but far enough to avoid triggering the thoroughbred's defense mechanisms." The breakthrough came during their 3rd session together. The thoroughbred had been showing signs of extreme anxiety during routine medical treatments. The Mustang, sensing this distress, demonstrated what appeared to be deliberate modeling behavior. He calmly underwent the same medical procedures in full view of the thoroughbred, maintaining relaxed body language throughout. Sarah, who had remained involved with his care, observed something extraordinary during these sessions. "He's not just showing them how to be calm," she explained to the research team. "He's showing them how to be horses again. It's like he remembers what it means to be free, despite his years in chains, and he's teaching them to remember too." The research expanded to include studies of his interactions with humans. Dr. Martinez's team documented how sanctuary visitors, particularly those dealing with their own trauma, responded to his presence. The data showed measurable decreases in stress indicators, lower heart rates, reduced cortisol levels, and improved emotional regulation in people who spent time near his paddock. One of the most significant findings came from analyzing his response to new arrivals at the sanctuary. The team discovered that he had developed what they termed a trauma assessment protocol, a systematic way of approaching and evaluating troubled horses. He would first observe from a distance, then gradually decrease the space between them, all while maintaining specific body postures that communicated safety and understanding. "What's fascinating," Dr. Wong noted, "is that this behavior appears to be entirely self-taught. Through his own experience of trauma and recovery, he's developed a sophisticated therapeutic approach that rivals our professional methods." The implications of these findings began to reshape understanding of animal intelligence and emotional processing. The research team's preliminary paper, published in a leading veterinary psychology journal, caused a stir in the scientific community. Titled "Emergence of Therapeutic Behavior in an Equine Trauma Survivor, a Case Study in Resilience and Cross-Species Healing," it challenged existing paradigms about animal consciousness and emotional complexity. Most intriguing to the researchers was how the Mustang seemed to remember and draw upon his own trauma in service of healing others. Rather than becoming defensive or withdrawn, he had transformed his suffering into a source of profound empathy. This observation led to new theories about post-traumatic growth in animals. The idea that trauma, when properly processed, could lead to enhanced emotional capabilities. Dr. Martinez's team began documenting what they called wisdom behaviors. Actions that demonstrated not just intelligence or instinct, but a deeper understanding of emotional healing. The Mustang showed an uncanny ability to match his energy and approach to each individual horse's needs, something that typically took years of training for human therapists to master. These scientific findings would later become the foundation for new approaches to animal rehabilitation, proving that sometimes the best teachers of healing are those who have walked the path of trauma themselves. The publication of Dr. Martinez's research sparked a revolution in animal therapy programs worldwide. What began as a single rescued Mustang's remarkable story was now influencing how rehabilitation centers across the globe approached trauma recovery in animals. The implications reached far beyond the equine world, challenging fundamental assumptions about animal healing and emotional intelligence. Claire Bennett, director of the International Animal Therapy Association, visited Desert Heart Sanctuary to observe the Mustang's methods firsthand. What she witnessed led her to convene an emergency symposium of leading animal behaviorists and therapy specialists in Geneva. "We need to completely rethink our approach," she declared in her opening address. "This horse has shown us that we've been underestimating the therapeutic potential within the animals themselves." The first major shift came from the Sydney Wildlife Rehabilitation Centre in Australia. Inspired by the Mustang's success, they began pairing recovered animals with newly rescued ones, carefully documenting the interactions. The results were remarkable. Rescued kangaroos showed significantly faster recovery rates when housed near successfully rehabilitated ones. The parallel to the Mustang's healing influence was unmistakable. Back at Desert Hearts, Dr. Gonzalez and her team were developing a formal protocol based on their observations of the Mustang's methods. They identified key elements of his approach: the careful initial assessment, the gradual building of trust, and most importantly, the power of example. "He doesn't just show them what to do," Dr. Gonzalez explained to visiting specialists. "He shows them who they can become." The protocol's success rate caught the attention of major veterinary schools. The University of California, Davis created a new course dedicated to what they called peer-based animal rehabilitation. Videos of the Mustang's interactions with other horses became required viewing for students. His story was no longer just about one horse's journey. It was becoming a cornerstone of modern animal therapy education. Perhaps the most surprising application came from the marine mammal rehabilitation community. The Coastal Marine Mammal Center in Oregon adapted the Mustang's methodology for work with traumatized seals and sea lions. "The principles are universal," explained Dr. Michael Chang, their lead veterinarian. "It's about creating an environment where healing can happen naturally, guided by those who have already made the journey." The Mustang's influence extended to domestic pet rehabilitation as well. Animal shelters began implementing mentor animal programs, where well-adjusted dogs and cats would help newcomers adapt to shelter life. The results were impressive: decreased stress levels, faster socialization, and higher adoption success rates. One particularly innovative program emerged in Colorado, where a wild horse sanctuary began applying the Mustang method to their entire rehabilitation process. They created a tiered system where recovered horses, carefully selected for their temperament and stability, became integral parts of the healing process for new arrivals. Dr. Thompson, who had been involved with the Mustang's case from the beginning, found himself traveling internationally to consult with rehabilitation centers. "What we're seeing is a paradigm shift," he explained during a conference in London. "We're moving from a model where humans direct all aspects of rehabilitation to one where we create the conditions for animals to help heal each other." The impact on traditional equine therapy programs was profound. Centers that worked with children with autism or veterans with PTSD began incorporating elements of the Mustang's approach. They discovered that horses who had overcome their own trauma often formed deeper connections with troubled humans, creating more effective therapeutic relationships. Research facilities around the world began conducting their own studies, building upon Dr. Martinez's initial findings. The Max Planck Institute for Animal Behavior in Germany launched a comprehensive study of emotional intelligence in rescued horses, using the Mustang's case as their baseline. Their preliminary results suggested that trauma survivors often developed enhanced empathetic capabilities, supporting what had been observed at Desert Hearts. Professional organizations began updating their guidelines to incorporate these new insights. The American Association of Equine Practitioners added a new section to their rehabilitation protocols, specifically addressing the role of peer support in recovery. They named it the Desert Hearts Protocol, in honor of where it all began. As the approach spread, success stories began pouring in from around the world. A traumatized elephant in a Thai sanctuary showed remarkable improvement after being paired with a recovered herd member. A group of rescued chimps in Africa developed their own hierarchy of healing, with recovered individuals naturally assuming supportive roles for newcomers. The Mustang's legacy was becoming clear. He hadn't just overcome his own trauma. He had illuminated a new path in animal rehabilitation, one that recognized and harnessed the healing power within the animals themselves. His story was proof that sometimes the most profound teachers emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. Among the countless lives touched by the Mustang's story, few were as dramatically transformed as that of Emma Collins, a 12-year-old girl who hadn't spoken a word since witnessing a traumatic accident 2 years earlier. Her parents had tried everything: traditional therapy, medication, alternative treatments, but nothing seemed to break through the wall of silence she had built around herself. When Emma's therapist suggested visiting Desert Heart Sanctuary, her parents were skeptical. They had heard about the famous healing horse, but couldn't imagine how another animal's story could help their daughter. Still, desperate for any possibility of breakthrough, they made the journey. What happened during Emma's first visit to the sanctuary would become one of the most powerful testimonials to the Mustang's extraordinary impact. As she stood quietly by his paddock, something remarkable occurred. The Mustang, who typically maintained a respectful distance with visitors, slowly approached the fence where Emma stood. He just stood there with her, recalled Lisa, the volunteer who witnessed the interaction. No movement, no demands, just this profound sense of understanding between them. It was like they recognized something in each other, this shared experience of being trapped in silence. After 20 minutes of this quiet communion, Emma did something that left her parents in tears. She spoke. "He knows," she whispered, her first words in 2 years. When asked what she meant, she added, "He knows what it's like to be locked away." This breakthrough led to regular visits to the sanctuary, where Emma gradually found her voice again. Through her connection with the Mustang, the sanctuary began documenting similar cases. There was Marcus, a veteran with severe PTSD who discovered a new purpose in life after witnessing the Mustang's work with other traumatized horses. "If he can transform a decade of chains into something healing," Marcus said, "then maybe my own trauma can mean something too." Marcus went on to develop a program combining veteran recovery with horse rehabilitation. Then there was Luna, a rescued mare so traumatized by abuse that other sanctuaries had deemed her too dangerous for rehabilitation. Within weeks of arriving at Desert Hearts and being introduced to the Mustang's presence, she showed the first signs of recovery. The transformation was so remarkable that it became a case study in Dr. Martinez's ongoing research. The children's therapy program at the sanctuary grew exponentially, built around the principles demonstrated by the Mustang. Young people dealing with various forms of trauma found something uniquely healing in his presence. "He doesn't try to fix you," explained 14-year-old Jason, who had struggled with anxiety after his parents' divorce. "He just shows you that it's possible to be whole again." Perhaps one of the most touching stories came from Sarah herself, the veterinarian who had first discovered him in chains. "Finding him changed everything about how I approach healing," she revealed in a documentary interview. "He taught me that sometimes the greatest act of healing is simply being present with another's pain, acknowledging it without trying to rush past it." The sanctuary began receiving letters from around the world, each telling a story of how the Mustang's journey had inspired hope and healing. A family in Germany wrote about how sharing his story had helped their autistic son begin to express his emotions. A rehabilitation center in Japan reported success using his case as a model for working with abandoned pets. Dr. Thompson documented the case of a police horse who'd been traumatized during a violent protest. Traditional rehabilitation methods had failed, but when introduced to the sanctuary's new protocol, inspired by the Mustang, the horse gradually returned to service. More importantly, it went on to become a calming presence for other police horses exposed to stressful situations. The impact rippled beyond individual cases. Families dealing with trauma began visiting the sanctuary, not just for direct interaction with the Mustang, but to observe and learn from his example. Parents reported using his story to help their children understand resilience and recovery. Teachers incorporated his journey into lessons about empathy and overcoming adversity. Even the sanctuary staff found themselves transformed by their daily interactions with him. "He's taught us to slow down," explained one of the night shift workers, "to really see the animals we work with, to recognize that healing has its own timeline and wisdom." The Mustang's influence extended to unexpected places. A group of inner-city youth participating in a rehabilitation program for troubled teens found profound inspiration in his story. "If he could survive 10 years in chains and still choose to help others," one young participant observed, "then maybe we can break free from our own chains too." These personal stories began weaving together into a larger narrative about the nature of healing itself. The Mustang had demonstrated that trauma, while deeply wounding, didn't have to be the end of the story. Through his example, countless others, both human and animal, were discovering their own paths to recovery and transformation. The Mustang's story began to resonate deeply within the wild horse conservation community, transforming from a singular tale of survival into a powerful catalyst for change. Carol Richardson, director of the Wild Horse Protection Alliance, recognized that his journey offered something unique to the ongoing debate about wild horse management: a vivid illustration of both what these animals endure and what they can become. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "His story puts a face on the issue," Carol explained during a congressional hearing on wild horse protection. "We're not just talking about statistics anymore. We're talking about intelligent, emotionally complex beings capable of extraordinary resilience and healing." The impact of her testimony, backed by the documented evidence of the Mustang's journey, helped shift the conversation from management to preservation. The Bureau of Land Management, responsible for wild horse populations on public lands, began receiving unprecedented public interest in their adoption programs. However, this interest came with new demands for accountability. People wanted to know more about where these horses ended up, inspired by the revelation of what had happened to one Mustang who had slipped through the cracks of the system. Dr. William Hayes, a wildlife biologist specializing in wild horse behavior, conducted a comprehensive study comparing the Mustang's remembered behaviors, those he displayed during rehabilitation, with current wild horse populations. "What we're seeing is remarkable," he reported. "Despite a decade in chains, he retained complex social behaviors that we observe in wild herds. This suggests these behaviors are deeply encoded, essential to their nature, and should be protected." The study sparked a new approach to wild horse management. Instead of focusing solely on population control, attention shifted to preserving natural behaviors and social structures. Sanctuary programs began implementing what they called behavioral preservation protocols, ensuring that even rescued horses could maintain their essential wild nature. Desert Heart Sanctuary became a hub for this new movement, hosting workshops that brought together conservationists, government officials, and sanctuary operators. The Mustang's rehabilitation area was converted into a teaching space, where visitors could observe how he had maintained his wild instincts despite years of confinement. One particularly moving moment came during a visit from a group of Native American elders from tribes with deep historical connections to wild horses. They spent several hours observing the Mustang, noting how his behaviors echoed the stories of horse wisdom passed down through their traditions. "He remembers," one elder said simply, "not just his own life, but the ancient ways of his kind." The conservation impact spread beyond wild horses. Other wildlife rehabilitation programs began examining their approaches, questioning whether they were doing enough to preserve natural behaviors alongside physical recovery. The Desert Hearts Protocol was adapted for various species, always emphasizing the importance of maintaining wild wisdom even in captive rehabilitation. The Mustang's influence reached into unexpected areas of environmental policy. His story became a compelling argument for preserving wild spaces, demonstrating how deeply ingrained natural behaviors remain even after years of separation from the wild. Conservation groups began using his journey to illustrate the importance of protecting not just individual animals, but their entire way of life. A significant breakthrough came when several Western states revised their wild horse management policies. The new guidelines, unofficially known as the Mustang Protocols, placed greater emphasis on preserving family bands and natural social structures. They also implemented stricter oversight of adoption programs, with regular welfare checks and more stringent criteria for potential adopters. The sanctuary began documenting how the Mustang's interactions with other horses revealed preserved wild behaviors. He showed remarkable skill in reading weather changes, maintaining natural herd hierarchies, and even demonstrating traditional grazing patterns. These observations provided valuable insights into wild horse behavior and were incorporated into conservation strategies. The impact on public awareness was profound. Visitors to the sanctuary often arrived expecting to see a broken creature, and instead encountered a powerful reminder of wild wisdom and resilience. Many left with a deeper understanding of what was at stake in wild horse conservation, not just the survival of individual animals, but the preservation of an ancient way of being. Research teams from major universities began studying how the Mustang's experience could inform wildlife rehabilitation practices. They were particularly interested in how he had maintained his essential nature despite prolonged captivity, and how this resilience could be supported in other rescued wild animals. The story reached international conservation communities, influencing approaches to wildlife rehabilitation worldwide. From elephant sanctuaries in Africa to wolf recovery programs in Europe, the principles demonstrated by the Mustang's journey began shaping how humans approached the delicate balance between rehabilitation and preserving wild nature. Desert Hearts Sanctuary underwent a complete transformation in the wake of the Mustang's success story. What began as a traditional horse rescue facility evolved into a pioneering center for innovative rehabilitation techniques. Dr. Gonzalez and her team developed what they called the Natural Wisdom Protocol, a comprehensive approach that would revolutionize animal rehabilitation practices worldwide. The new protocol started with a radical premise that traumatized animals retained an inner wisdom that, if properly supported, could guide their own healing process. This insight came directly from observing how the Mustang had not only recovered, but had developed his own sophisticated approach to helping other horses. "We had to completely rethink our role," explained Dr. Gonzalez during a training session for new staff members. "Instead of seeing ourselves as healers who fix broken animals, we became facilitators who create the conditions for natural healing to emerge." This shift in perspective led to dramatic changes in how the sanctuary operated. The first major change was the redesign of rehabilitation spaces. Traditional stall configurations were replaced with what they called wisdom circles, carefully planned areas that allowed recovering horses to observe and learn from those further along in their healing journey. The design was inspired by how the Mustang would position himself to provide optimal support for newcomers. Sarah, who had remained deeply involved with the sanctuary's development, spearheaded the creation of a new intake process. "We learned from him that the first moments are crucial," she explained. "Instead of immediately trying to treat or fix, we create space for new arrivals to feel safe enough to show us what they need." The sanctuary's training program for staff and volunteers underwent a complete overhaul. Everyone, from veterinarians to maintenance workers, was trained in what they called presence practice, the art of being with animals in a way that supported their natural healing capacity. This approach was directly modeled on the Mustang's extraordinary ability to provide calm, steady support without forcing interaction. Perhaps the most innovative aspect of the new protocol was the healing system. Recovered horses, carefully selected for their temperament and stability, were gradually integrated into the rehabilitation process as what the staff called wisdom keepers. These horses, following the Mustang's example, became instrumental in helping new arrivals adjust and heal. Dr. Thompson documented the remarkable success rates of this new approach. "We're seeing recovery times cut in half," he reported in a peer-reviewed study. "But more importantly, the quality of recovery is different. These horses aren't just surviving trauma, they're transforming it into something meaningful." The sanctuary developed specialized programs for different types of trauma. One area focused on horses rescued from racing industries, another for victims of neglect, and a third for wild horses transitioning from capture. Each program incorporated elements of the Mustang's approach while adapting to specific needs. Technology played a surprising role in the new methodology. The sanctuary installed a sophisticated monitoring system that could track subtle changes in horse behavior and interaction patterns. This data helped refine their understanding of how healing happened naturally when the right conditions were present. The impact on the veterinary community was profound. Traditional treatment protocols began incorporating extended observation periods and peer support systems. Dr. Maria Ruiz, a leading veterinary behaviorist, noted, "We're learning that sometimes the best medicine isn't medicine at all. It's creating the right environment for natural healing processes to emerge." Training programs for new sanctuary. Staff became increasingly sophisticated. Beyond basic horse care and medical knowledge, workers learned to read subtle body language, understand herd dynamics, and recognize signs of emotional healing. The Mustang's interactions were used as teaching examples, carefully documented and analyzed. The sanctuary's success led to the establishment of satellite facilities across the country, each implementing the Natural Wisdom Protocol with their own rescued horses. These centers formed a network of healing spaces, sharing knowledge and resources while adapting the core principles to their specific contexts. International interest grew as success stories multiplied. Sanctuary operators from as far away as Australia and South Africa came to study the new methodology. Each returned home with not just a set of techniques, but a fundamentally new understanding of animal healing and rehabilitation. The intersection between the Mustang's story and human trauma recovery began almost by accident. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a trauma therapist visiting Desert Heart Sanctuary, noticed something remarkable while observing his interactions with other horses. The methods he used, patient presence, non-verbal support, and careful attention to boundaries, paralleled the most effective human therapeutic techniques. What struck me most, Dr. Chen wrote in her groundbreaking paper for the Journal of Trauma Studies, was how this horse instinctively understood principles that take human therapists years to master. He demonstrated perfect attunement to others' emotional states, knew exactly when to move closer or give space, and showed remarkable skill in pacing the healing process. The Veterans Healing Project became one of the first programs to formally incorporate lessons from the Mustang's approach. James Miller, a former Marine struggling with PTSD, initiated the program after his own transformative experience at the sanctuary. "Watching how he helped other horses heal changed everything for me," James explained. "He showed me that trauma doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can become a source of wisdom and healing for others." The program paired combat veterans with rescued horses, but with a crucial difference from traditional equine therapy. Instead of focusing solely on the human-horse interaction, they emphasized observing and learning from the Mustang's method. Veterans watched how he approached traumatized horses, noting his patience, his respect for boundaries, and his ability to remain present without demanding change. Mental health professionals began studying the implications for human trauma recovery. Dr. Sarah Winters, a leading expert in developmental trauma, observed striking parallels between the Mustang's approach and the most effective human therapeutic methods. He naturally demonstrates what we call therapeutic presence, the ability to remain fully present with another's pain without trying to fix or change it. The Children's Trauma Recovery Center in Denver developed a new program based on these insights. Young trauma survivors spent time observing the Mustang's interactions with other horses before beginning their own healing work. Children who've experienced trauma often struggle with traditional talk therapy, explained Dr. Michael Torres, the center's director, but they intuitively understand what they're seeing in these horse interactions. One particularly moving case involved a group of teenagers from a residential treatment facility. Many had experienced severe trauma and struggled with traditional therapy approaches. During their visits to the sanctuary, they observed how the Mustang would often simply stand quietly with troubled horses, offering presence without pressure. "That's when it clicked for me," shared 15-year-old Maya, who had survived domestic violence. "He shows us that sometimes healing isn't about doing anything. It's about being there, being witness to someone's pain without trying to rush them through it." This insight led to significant breakthroughs in her own recovery process. Professional therapeutic training programs began incorporating video footage of the Mustang's interactions into their curricula. Students studied his timing, his ability to read subtle cues, and his skill in creating what therapists called safe psychological space. These observations led to refinements in human therapeutic techniques, particularly in non-verbal aspects of trauma recovery. The impact extended to group therapy settings. The Mustang's method of creating healing communities among horses inspired new approaches to group trauma work. Therapists noted how he would carefully integrate new horses into existing groups, always attentive to the delicate balance of individual and collective healing needs. Hospital trauma units started implementing principles derived from observing his work. The Chicago Memorial Hospital's Trauma Recovery Ward redesigned their space and protocols based on the wisdom circles concept from Desert Hearts. Staff were trained to prioritize presence over intervention, creating what they called healing spaces, where patients could feel safe enough to begin their recovery journey. Perhaps most significantly, his example began influencing how trauma survivors viewed themselves and their experiences. What the Mustang shows us, explained Dr. Chen, is that surviving trauma can lead to extraordinary capacity for healing. He transforms victims into wisdom keepers, showing us that our wounds can become sources of deep understanding and connection. Research teams documented how exposure to his story affected trauma survivors' recovery trajectories. Those who learned about his journey showed increased hope, better engagement with treatment, and stronger belief in the possibility of post-traumatic growth. His transformation from trauma survivor to healer offered a powerful new narrative for human recovery. The transformation of the Mustang's story into educational curriculum began with a simple question from a visiting fourth-grade teacher. How can we help children understand resilience? The answer would lead to the development of comprehensive educational programs that would touch lives in classrooms across the country. Jennifer Martinez, an educational consultant with 20 years of experience, spearheaded the development of what became known as the Wild Wisdom Curriculum. Working closely with Desert Heart Sanctuary staff, she created age-appropriate materials that used the Mustang's journey to teach essential life lessons about courage, empathy, and healing. The elementary school program, Healing Hearts, centered around a carefully crafted narrative of the Mustang's journey. Students learned about his experience through a series of interactive lessons that connected his story to their own lives. Children naturally relate to animals, Jennifer explained. His story gives them a safe way to explore difficult topics like trauma, recovery, and the power of helping others. In one particularly effective exercise, students were asked to imagine writing letters to the Mustang at different points in his journey. The responses revealed deep emotional understanding. "Dear Mustang," wrote 9-year-old Kevin, "I know what it's like when bad things happen and you feel stuck, but you showed me that we can get better and even help others get better too." Middle school curricula focused more on the scientific and social aspects of his story. Students studied the biology of trauma and healing, learned about wild horse conservation, and explored concepts of animal intelligence and emotional complexity. The program integrated elements of biology, environmental science, and social studies, making it particularly valuable for cross-disciplinary learning. High school programs took an even deeper dive into the implications of his story. Advanced biology classes studied the physiological aspects of trauma and recovery. Psychology students analyzed his healing methods, comparing them with human therapeutic techniques. Environmental science classes used his case to explore broader questions about wildlife conservation and human-animal relationships. The sanctuary developed a special program for students with learning differences or emotional challenges. These students often found particular resonance with the Mustang's story of overcoming adversity. The program included regular visits to the sanctuary, where students could observe his interactions with other horses and participate in guided reflection activities. "What makes this curriculum unique," explained Dr. Robert Kim, an educational psychologist, "is how it naturally integrates social-emotional learning with academic content. Students aren't just learning facts, they're developing emotional intelligence and empathy through their engagement with this remarkable story." Teacher training became an essential component of the program. Educators participated in intensive workshops at the sanctuary, learning how to effectively present the material and handle sensitive discussions that might arise. They also learned to recognize when students might be processing their own trauma through their response to the story. The curriculum's impact extended beyond traditional academic measures. School counselors reported that students who participated in the program showed increased emotional awareness and better coping skills. Many schools noted improved classroom dynamics and reduced bullying incidents after implementing the program. Parents began noticing changes at home as well. My daughter started talking about being present with her younger brother when he's upset, shared one mother. She said she learned it from how the Mustang helps other horses, that sometimes you just need to be there for someone without trying to fix everything. The program's success led to its adoption by alternative education settings. Juvenile detention facilities found that the Mustang's story resonated deeply with troubled youth. These kids understand what it means to be chained, literally or metaphorically, explained youth counselor Miguel Rodriguez. His story shows them there's a way out, and more importantly, that their struggles could help them help others. International schools began adapting the curriculum for their own contexts. The universal themes of resilience, healing, and transformation translated easily across cultural boundaries. Japanese schools particularly embraced the program, incorporating it into their character education initiatives. The educational impact rippled beyond formal classroom settings. Libraries created reading programs around his story. Museums developed interactive exhibits exploring the science of animal intelligence and emotion. Youth organizations incorporated elements of the curriculum into their leadership development programs. Most significantly, the curriculum helped create a new generation of animal welfare advocates and conservation-minded citizens. Students who learned about the Mustang's journey often became passionate about protecting wild horses and other endangered species, understanding that every animal has its own story of significance to tell. The transformation of public policy began in the state legislature, where Senator Maria Rodriguez introduced what would become known as the Mustang Protection Act. The bill, inspired directly by the chained Mustang story, aimed to close the loopholes that had allowed his abuse to go undetected for so long. "We can't change the past," Senator Rodriguez declared during the bill's first reading, "but we can ensure that no other horse endures what this one did." The proposed legislation included mandatory welfare checks for adopted wild horses, stricter penalties for abuse, and expanded authority for investigators to access private property when abuse was suspected. The bill's journey through the legislative process became a masterclass in how personal stories can drive policy change. During committee hearings, Sarah testified about finding the Mustang in chains, her voice breaking as she described his condition. Dr. Thompson presented medical evidence, documenting the sophisticated nature of the abuse, demonstrating why existing laws had been insufficient to prevent it. What made the legislation particularly effective was its comprehensive approach. Beyond just increasing penalties, it created a new framework for monitoring adopted wild horses. Regular welfare checks would be required for the first 5 years after adoption, with additional random inspections throughout the horse's life. The system was designed to prevent any horse from falling through the cracks as the Mustang had. The sanctuary's detailed documentation of his rehabilitation proved crucial in shaping the bill's provisions for recovery facilities. We needed to ensure that rescue organizations had the resources and authority to implement proper rehabilitation programs, explained legislative analyst David Chen. The Desert Hearts protocols became our gold standard for what proper care should look like. As news of the state legislation spread, other jurisdictions began taking notice. California and Oregon quickly introduced similar measures, often expanding upon the original bill's provisions. California's version included mandatory training for law enforcement officers in recognizing signs of equine abuse, directly inspired by how the Mustang situation had gone unnoticed by local authorities. The federal government took notice as, well, congressional hearings on wild horse protection featured extensive testimony about the Mustang's case. His story became a powerful argument for strengthening federal oversight of wild horse adoption programs. The Bureau of Land Management began revising its policies, implementing many of the safeguards first proposed in the state legislation. International impact followed. Countries with wild horse populations from Australia to Spain began examining their own protection measures. The European Union's Animal Welfare Commission cited the Mustang's case in their recommendations for strengthening equine protection laws across member states. Private organizations also responded to the changing legislative landscape. Insurance companies developed new policies specifically for sanctuary operations, incorporating standards inspired by Desert Heart's protocols. Adoption agencies revised their screening processes, implementing more rigorous background checks and property inspections. The legal community saw significant changes as well. Law schools began offering specialized courses in animal welfare law, often using the Mustang's case as a central study. The American Bar Association created a new certification in animal welfare law, recognizing the growing complexity of cases in this field. Perhaps most significantly, the legislation sparked a broader conversation about animal sentience and legal protection. Courts began considering animal emotional welfare in abuse cases, not just physical harm. The Mustang's documented emotional intelligence and healing abilities became powerful evidence in arguments for stronger animal protection laws. Local governments started creating specialized animal welfare units within their law enforcement agencies. These units received training in both investigation techniques and animal behavior, better equipping them to recognize and respond to cases of abuse. Many base their protocols on the lessons learned from the Mustang's case. The impact extended to urban planning codes. New regulations required proper facilities and space for horses kept within city limits. Regular inspections became mandatory, and neighbors gained clearer channels for reporting suspected abuse. These changes directly addressed how the Mustang's abuse had gone unreported, despite its proximity to populated areas. Veterinary licensing boards updated their requirements to include training in trauma recognition and reporting procedures. The changes acknowledged that veterinarians, like Sarah, often served as the first line of defense in detecting animal abuse. Mandatory reporting laws were strengthened, removing any ambiguity about professionals' obligations to report suspected abuse. The media transformation of the Mustang story began with Sandra Martinez's documentary, Unchained Spirit, but quickly grew into something far more expansive. What started as a simple film about one horse's journey became a global phenomenon that would reshape how people thought about animal consciousness, trauma, and healing. The documentary itself broke new ground in wildlife filmmaking. Instead of dramatizing events or forcing narrative arcs, Sandra let the story unfold naturally through careful observation. Her cameras captured intimate moments of interaction between the Mustang and other horses, revealing subtle dynamics that had never been documented before. "We wanted to show the truth of his journey," Sandra explained during a filmmakers panel at Sundance. No manufactured drama, no artificial storylines, just the pure reality of what happens when trauma transforms into healing. The approach resonated with audiences and critics alike, earning the film numerous awards and sparking intense public interest in the sanctuary's work. Social media played an unexpected role in amplifying his story. The sanctuary's simple Facebook page, originally created to share basic updates, exploded with followers after clips from the documentary went viral. Short videos showing the Mustang's interactions with other traumatized horses garnered millions of views, with viewers from around the world sharing their own stories of healing and hope. Children's book author Maria Chen visited the sanctuary, intending to spend one day gathering material. She ended up staying for 3 months, resulting in a series of books that would help children understand complex themes of resilience and recovery. The Mustang Who Remember Freedom became a bestseller, translated into 28 languages and used in schools worldwide. Major news organizations began sending reporters to cover different aspects of the story. The New York Times ran a feature in their science section about the revolutionary findings in animal psychology. National Geographic produced a special issue dedicated to wild horse intelligence, featuring the Mustang's story as its centerpiece. The BBC created a multi-part series exploring the broader implications of his journey for animal welfare and conservation. The publishing industry saw an unprecedented wave of books inspired by his story. Scientific texts examined the implications for animal consciousness and emotion. Self-help authors drew parallels between his healing journey and human recovery. From trauma, academic works analyzed the social and cultural impact of his story on animal welfare movements. Digital media platforms created innovative ways to share his ongoing story. A popular podcast series, Lessons from the Sanctuary, featured weekly updates and interviews with staff members, researchers, and visitors. Virtual reality developers created an immersive experience that allowed people to visit the sanctuary and observe his interactions with other horses. Artists found inspiration in his story as well. Painters, sculptors, and photographers created works that captured different aspects of his journey. A traveling exhibition, Freedom Remembered, featured these works alongside educational materials about wild horse conservation and animal welfare. The sanctuary's YouTube channel became an unexpected source of comfort for people dealing with their own trauma. Weekly updates showing the Mustang's gentle interactions with other horses drew comments from viewers around the world who found hope and healing in watching his work. The comment sections became impromptu support communities where people shared their own stories of recovery. Hollywood took notice, but the sanctuary was selective about how his story would be told. They turned down numerous offers for dramatized versions, instead working with carefully chosen partners to create educational content that stayed true to the real impact of his journey. This dedication to authenticity only increased public trust and interest in the sanctuary's work. The medical community began incorporating documentary footage into training materials for mental health professionals. Clips showing his careful, patient approach to traumatized horses became teaching tools for therapists learning about non-verbal communication and presence-based healing. International media coverage led to unexpected cross-cultural connections. Japanese television created a series exploring parallels between the Mustang's story and traditional Eastern philosophies about healing and transformation. Middle Eastern broadcasters focused on the desert heritage of horses and their historical role in human emotional well-being. Perhaps most significantly, his story began changing how media portrayed animal intelligence and emotion. Gone were the simplistic narratives of animals as either dangerous wild creatures or cute pets. In their place emerged more nuanced discussions about animal consciousness, emotional complexity, and the interconnected nature of healing between species. 5 years after the Mustang's rescue, the scientific community had amassed an unprecedented body of research about his abilities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What began as simple observation had evolved into sophisticated studies using advanced technology to understand the mechanisms behind his extraordinary healing influence on other animals. Dr. Elena Martinez, led a groundbreaking 3-year study, funded by the National Science Foundation, utilizing cutting-edge neuroimaging equipment modified for equine subjects. The research aimed to understand what happened in the brains of traumatized horses during their interactions with the Mustang. What we discovered challenged everything we thought we knew about animal consciousness, Dr. Martinez explained during a presentation at the International Conference on Animal Cognition. The neural synchronization patterns we observed between the Mustang and the horses he worked with suggested levels of emotional attunement previously thought impossible in non-human species. The study used portable EEG devices specially designed for horses, allowing researchers to monitor brain activity during natural interactions. The data revealed remarkable patterns. When the Mustang engaged with traumatized horses, both animals' brainwaves would gradually synchronize, showing patterns typically associated with deep meditation and emotional regulation in humans. Dr. James Wong's team from MIT developed new analytical tools to study the subtle body language and nonverbal communication involved in these interactions. Using AI-powered movement analysis, they documented over 300 distinct gestures and postures the Mustang used to communicate with different horses, each carefully calibrated to the recipient's emotional state. It's not just random behavior. Dr. Wong emphasized, there's a sophisticated methodology at work here. He assesses each horse's trauma profile and adjusts his approach accordingly. This suggests levels of emotional intelligence and strategic thinking that revolutionize our understanding of animal cognition. The research expanded to include studies of hormone levels and stress indicators. Blood samples taken before, during, and after interactions with the Mustang showed significant changes in cortisol and oxytocin levels in traumatized horses. More surprisingly, similar changes were observed in the Mustang himself, suggesting a physiological component to his healing work. Dr. Sarah Thompson's longitudinal study tracked the progress of 50 horses who had worked with the Mustang over 3 years. The results showed not just recovery from trauma, but evidence of what she termed transmitted resilience. The horses appeared to learn and retain his calming techniques, often going on to help other traumatized animals themselves. The implications for evolutionary biology were profound. Dr. Marcus Chen's paper in Nature suggested that the Mustang's abilities might represent an advanced form of social learning that had evolved in wild horse herds but remained largely unstudied. These capabilities challenge our assumptions about the evolutionary development of emotional intelligence, he wrote. The Sanctuary's research program expanded to include collaborative studies with human medical researchers. Dr. Rebecca Foster's team from Johns Hopkins studied parallels between the Mustang's healing methods and successful human trauma therapy techniques. Their findings suggested surprising similarities in the fundamental mechanisms of emotional healing across species. Neuroplasticity became a major focus of research as scientists studied how the Mustang's own brain had adapted to and transcended his trauma. MRI studies revealed unusual development in areas associated with emotional processing and social cognition, suggesting his abilities might have emerged as an adaptive response to his years of isolation. The scientific community was particularly intrigued by what they termed the ripple effect, how horses who had recovered through interaction with the Mustang often developed similar abilities to help others. This suggested the possibility of transmissible emotional intelligence, a concept that sparked intense debate and further research. International research teams began conducting parallel studies with other species. A project in South Africa documented similar healing abilities in elephants who had survived trauma. Researchers in Japan found evidence of comparable emotional intelligence in rehabilitated dolphins. The Mustang's case had opened new avenues for understanding emotional complexity throughout the animal kingdom. Perhaps most significantly, the research began challenging fundamental assumptions about consciousness itself. Dr. Elena Martinez's final paper proposed a new framework for understanding animal consciousness, one that recognized sophisticated emotional and social capabilities as key indicators of advanced consciousness, rather than just tool use or problem-solving abilities. 7 years after his rescue, the Mustang's influence had grown far beyond anyone's initial expectations. His legacy wasn't just in the hundreds of horses he had directly helped, or even in the revolutionary treatment protocols he had inspired. Instead, he had fundamentally altered how humans understood and related to animals, creating ripples that would influence generations to come. The Desert Heart Sanctuary had evolved into what they called a legacy center, where his methods and philosophy continued to shape new approaches to animal rehabilitation. Young veterinarians and animal behaviorists came from around the world to study what became known as conscious rehabilitation, an approach that recognized and honored animals' innate wisdom and healing capabilities. What he taught us goes far beyond traditional animal care, Dr. Gonzalez explained during a graduation ceremony for the sanctuary's first class of certified rehabilitation specialists. He showed us that true healing isn't something we do to animals. It's something we facilitate by creating the right conditions and then trusting their inner wisdom. The impact on veterinary education was profound. Major veterinary schools had revised their curricula to include what they called emotional competency training. Students learned to recognize and work with animals' emotional intelligence rather than just treating physical symptoms. The Mustang's case studies became required reading, with his documented methods forming the foundation for new approaches to animal care. Perhaps most significantly, his legacy influenced how humans viewed their role in animal welfare. Instead of seeing themselves as rescuers or saviors, people began to understand themselves as partners in a mutual journey of healing and growth. This shift in perspective led to more respectful, collaborative approaches to animal rehabilitation and conservation. Sarah, who had first discovered him in chains, found herself increasingly focused on teaching this new paradigm. "He taught us humility," she would explain to her students. "We thought we were rescuing him, but in reality, he was showing us a whole new way of understanding healing. He revealed capabilities in animals that we hadn't even imagined existed." The sanctuary's research department documented what they called the generational impact, how horses who had recovered through interaction with the Mustang went on to help others, creating a cascade of healing that extended far beyond his direct influence. This phenomenon suggested that emotional intelligence and healing capabilities could be taught and transmitted through animal communities. Conservation programs worldwide began incorporating his legacy into their approach. Instead of just focusing on physical preservation of species, they began considering emotional and social welfare as crucial components of wildlife protection. The Desert Heart's protocols became standard practice in rehabilitation centers globally, acknowledging that emotional healing was as important as physical recovery. The impact extended into domestic animal care as well. Pet owners began to understand their animals as emotionally complex beings capable of sophisticated social interactions. Training methods shifted away from dominance-based approaches toward more collaborative, emotionally aware techniques inspired by the Mustang's example. Educational programs continued to evolve, teaching children not just about animal care, but about the profound connections possible between species. Schools reported that students who learned about his story showed increased empathy, not just toward animals, but toward each other as well. The lesson that trauma could be transformed into wisdom and healing resonated across species boundaries. The scientific community's understanding of animal consciousness had been permanently altered, Research inspired by his case led to new fields of study exploring emotional intelligence in various species. The possibility that animals could consciously choose to help heal others challenged existing paradigms about animal cognition and social behavior. Legal frameworks continued to evolve, reflecting this deeper understanding of animal consciousness. Courts began considering emotional distress in animal abuse cases, and legislation increasingly recognized animals as sentient beings capable of complex emotional experiences. His legacy influenced everything from local animal welfare ordinances to international wildlife protection treaties. The sanctuary itself became a living laboratory for studying long-term effects of trauma recovery and emotional healing in animals. Researchers documented how recovered horses would instinctively adopt aspects of the Mustang's gentle, patient approach when interacting with new arrivals. This suggested that his methods weren't just personal traits but teachable skills that could be passed on. As his direct influence began to fade with time, his legacy grew stronger through the countless lives he had touched and transformed. The Mustang, who had survived a decade in chains, had not just overcome his own trauma. He had illuminated a new path in human-animal relationships, showing that the deepest healing comes through mutual understanding and respect. On a quiet evening at Desert Heart Sanctuary, a small group gathered to share their stories of how the Mustang had changed their lives. The meeting, intended to record personal testimonies for the sanctuary's archives, turned into something more profound. A reflection on how one horse's journey had transformed countless human lives. Sarah, the veterinarian who had first discovered him, spoke first. Her voice still carried the emotion of that initial encounter. Finding him changed everything, not just my approach to veterinary medicine, but my entire understanding of healing. He taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply be present with another's pain. I've spent years studying medicine, but he showed me what true healing looks like. Dr. Thompson, who had documented the Mustang's physical recovery, shared how the experience had revolutionized his approach to trauma care. In 30 years of veterinary practice, I'd never seen anything like it. We think we're the healers, but he showed us that animals carry their own profound wisdom about healing. My entire approach to medicine changed. I learned to look for the healing wisdom within each animal, rather than just imposing our treatments. Lisa, the volunteer, who had spent countless lunch breaks reading to him, described how those quiet moments had transformed her understanding of connection. People thought I was crazy at first, reading books to a horse, but in those moments of shared silence, I learned more about genuine presence than in years of human interaction. He taught me that connection doesn't always need words. The sanctuary's night supervisor, Miguel, shared stories of quiet observations during his overnight shifts. There were nights when new horses would arrive, terrified and defensive. He seemed to know exactly what they needed, sometimes just standing quietly nearby, other times approaching with such gentle purpose. Watching him taught me patience, in my own life, especially with my children. Dr. Gonzalez reflected on how her entire approach to running the sanctuary had evolved. Before him, we focused primarily on physical rehabilitation, but he showed us that emotional healing was just as important. We completely restructured our programs based on what we learned from watching his interactions. He became our greatest teacher. Young veterinary students who had studied his case shared how it influenced their career choices. Reading about him in vet school was one thing, said Emma Chen, now a resident at the sanctuary, but actually witnessing his work with other horses showed me what's possible in animal care. It made me want to explore deeper aspects of healing than just physical medicine. James, the former Marine who had found his own healing through observing the Mustang, spoke about the profound impact on his PTSD recovery. Watching how he transformed his trauma into a gift for helping others It changed how I saw my own struggles. He showed me that our wounds don't have to define us. They can become a source of wisdom and healing for others. The sanctuary's maintenance worker, Tom, shared a different perspective. I'm not a horse person, never was, but watching him work with troubled horses taught me things about communication I never learned from humans. He showed that sometimes the most powerful messages don't need words at all. Children who had grown up visiting the sanctuary offered their memories. He made me feel safe, said 12-year-old Maya, who had first visited as a traumatized 6-year-old. I didn't need to explain anything to him. He just knew. That helped me trust people again. Research assistants who had spent years documenting his methods shared how it had changed their view of animal consciousness. We came with our scientific protocols and measurement tools, Dr. Rebecca Lee explained. But he showed us forms of intelligence and emotion that couldn't be captured in our data. He made us rethink everything we thought we knew about animal consciousness. The sanctuary's photographer, David, spoke about the challenge of capturing the Mustang's work visually. There was something in his eyes, a depth of understanding that was hard to photograph but impossible to miss in person. Every time I thought I'd captured it, he'd show another layer of wisdom that would surprise me. Even the local sheriff, initially skeptical of the sanctuary's work, shared how the Mustang had changed his perspective on animal welfare enforcement. Seeing how he helped other horses recover made me realize we needed to change how we handle animal abuse cases. It wasn't just about enforcement anymore. It was about understanding and preventing trauma. As the evening drew to a close, these personal reflections painted a portrait of transformation that extended far beyond the sanctuary's boundaries. The Mustang hadn't just recovered from his own trauma. He had become a teacher, showing humans and animals alike the true meaning of healing, resilience, and connection. 10 years after his rescue, the Mustang's story had become more than just a tale of survival and transformation. It had evolved into a movement that continued to reshape our understanding of healing, consciousness, and the profound connections possible between species. His legacy lived on, not just in the protocols and programs he inspired, but in a fundamental shift in how humans and animals could help each other heal and grow. At Desert Heart Sanctuary, a new generation of horses carried forward his healing work. Many of these horses had never met him directly, but had learned his methods through the cascade of wisdom he had started. The sanctuary staff observed with amazement how these horses naturally adopted his gentle, patient approach when working with traumatized newcomers. Sarah, now the sanctuary's director, often reflected on that first day she found him in chains. "We thought we were witnessing a tragedy," she would tell new volunteers. "Instead, we were seeing the beginning of something extraordinary." His chains became the catalyst for a revolution in how we understand animal consciousness and healing. The scientific studies continued, each new discovery adding to his legacy. Researchers documented how horses who had recovered through his influence went on to help others, creating what they called healing lineages that extended far beyond the sanctuary's boundaries. These findings suggested that emotional intelligence and healing abilities could be transmitted through animal communities in ways previously thought impossible. The educational programs inspired by his story had reached millions of children worldwide. In classrooms across the globe, young people learned about resilience, empathy, and the transformative power of healing through his journey. Teachers reported that his story had a unique way of helping children process their own challenges and understand the possibility of turning trauma into wisdom. Legal protections for animals had been permanently strengthened by his influence. The Mustang laws, as they came to be known, set new standards for animal welfare and rehabilitation. More importantly, they reflected a deeper understanding of animals as emotionally complex beings capable of both suffering and extraordinary healing. The sanctuary itself had evolved into an international center for what they called conscious rehabilitation, an approach that honored the wisdom and healing capabilities inherent in animals themselves. Veterinarians, behaviorists, and caregivers from around the world came to learn these methods, carrying them back to their own communities. Perhaps most significantly, his story had challenged fundamental assumptions about the boundaries between human and animal consciousness. The documented evidence of his emotional intelligence and healing abilities had opened new fields of study in animal cognition and cross-species communication. These discoveries continued to influence everything from wildlife conservation to domestic animal care. The ripple effects of his journey touched lives in unexpected ways. Veterans finding peace through animal therapy programs, children overcoming trauma through connections with rescued horses, and countless animals finding their way back from the brink of despair. All were part of his living legacy. The sanctuary maintained a special memorial garden where visitors could reflect on his story, but the true memorial wasn't in any physical location. It was in the countless lives transformed by his example. His journey from chains to healing had shown that trauma, while deeply wounding, could become a source of profound wisdom and connection. As new challenges arose in animal welfare and conservation, his story continued to provide inspiration and guidance. The principles he had demonstrated, patience, presence, and the power of gentle wisdom, proved relevant to an ever-widening circle of healing work with both animals and humans. The documentaries, books, and research papers about his journey had become part of the curriculum in veterinary schools and animal behavior programs worldwide. But beyond these formal studies, his greatest legacy was in showing that healing is possible even after the deepest trauma, and that sometimes our wounds can become gifts we use to help others heal. Dr. Thompson, in his final paper before retirement, perhaps said it best. The Mustang's story teaches us that chains, whether physical or emotional, need not define us. His journey shows us that within every wounded being lies the potential not just for healing, but for becoming a healer. In the end, his decade in chains became not just a story of survival, but a testament to the extraordinary capacity for transformation that exists in all living beings. As the sun set over Desert Heart's sanctuary each evening, the spirit of his legacy lived on in every gentle interaction, every moment of healing, and every transformed life. The Mustang, who had once stood imprisoned in chains, had become a beacon of hope, showing the world that from the darkest confinement could emerge the most profound freedom, the freedom to heal, to connect, and to help others find their way back to wholeness. Up next, you got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.